Welcome to the San Jose Hockey Now podcast. I'm Sheng Peng, editor-in-chief of San Jose Hockey Now. You can also find my work at MEC Sharks and on Twitter, Sheng_Peng, Blue Sky, Sheng Peng.
And I'm Keegan McNally. You can find me on Twitter at #half_hockey, my website, half-hockey.com, or at San Jose Hockey Now. We have a ton of trade news to talk with you about today. But before we get to all that, Sheng's got a quick word from our sponsor, Bring Hockey Back.
Yeah, so last week we announced our first ever title sponsor of the podcast. Really excited. And so anyway, Bring Hockey Back, bringhockeyback.net. Of course, you might know them from the director of Vibes and their Shorks t-shirts. Actually, I gotta break that out, but we're wearing different t-shirts today that we'll talk to you about in a little bit. They also do custom hockey jerseys for teams of any kind of size or whatever, right? For any kind of event. If you know Bring Hockey Back and their great t-shirts, you know that they've been designing some awesome t-shirts for years and years and years. And so anyway, go check out their stuff. We're going to bring back, I'm going to talk with Sam Brown of Bring Hockey Back. I'll bring you back a couple of the classic Sharks designs from the past. And anyway, so go to bringhockeyback.net for awesome t-shirts, awesome stuff, custom hockey jerseys. And of course, there's one that I love on their site right now. It's the Bring Kachuk Back and Find Out. So
Check
that's still on there, right? Oh, Kachuk Around and Find Out. Sorry.
There it is.
Yeah. So anyway, go to bringhockeyback.net to get that. And I think that we're kind of trying to cook up a sleepover t-shirt, huh? So just a little tease, little tease. So you might have saw a design out there that Bring Hockey Back put out there. So yeah, something in the works, hopefully.
It's a great sponsorship because I got a free t-shirt in the mail from Maui Powerhouse Gym, which is part of this entire enterprise here. It's got a little 71-2 patch on the side.
That's awesome. I have it too.
Boom!
Yeah,
look at that.
Yeah.
It's very comfortable.
It's cold in my room here. So yeah,
it's a great sponsorship because I love collecting t-shirts. So you know what? Send me 1 billion t-shirts. I'll wear every single one. I have like I mentioned on the podcast before. I have a collection of Star Trek t-shirts. So you know what? Just throw them at me. I love it. Anyway,
thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Peter. After this quick intro here, we have a number of trades that the Sharks made this deadline. They were very active. And we're going to cover 2 of the biggest ones. We'll mention briefly off the top all of the trades, but I think we're going to get into some deep discussion about 2 in particular. So real quick, I'm just going to mention all of the trades that were made in the past few days. We have San Jose Sharks in Edmonton. Jake Walman was traded to Edmonton for a 2026 first-round pick, and Carl Berglund. San Jose Sharks in Ottawa made a trade. Fabian Zetterlund, Tristan Robbins, a 2025.
That's my Gary Bettman face.
4th round pick was traded for Ottawa's 2nd round pick this year. Zach Ostapchuk, Noah Gregor, who's a familiar Sharks name. San Jose Sharks in Columbus made a last minute deal for Luke Kunin for a 2025 4th. San Jose Sharks in Florida, Nico Sturm plus a 2027 7th round pick were sent for a 2026 4th round pick. We're almost there. Vitek Vanacek was traded for Patrick Gillies, and San Jose Sharks said we don't have any defensemen anymore. Vincent Desharnais was traded from Pittsburgh to San Jose for a 2028 5th round pick, and then Gabe Carrier signed his ELC, and we're done. Show over. All right. That's it. We're going to start, Sheng, with the Jake Walman trade, because I think that was one that kind of started this surprise event for everybody.
Sure.
I was watching the San Jose Sharks game, and it was just in the build-up to it. I texted you because Dave Pagnotta put out a report that Sharks were closing in on a trade, or Edmonton was closing in a trade for Jake Walman. And I was like, yeah, I don't know. But he was very sure of himself, which is interesting. Yeah. So it ended up happening. And I think everybody kind of expected it would be sort of an overpay because of how important Jake Walman is to the Sharks right now. And it seemed like maybe it was, or maybe it was good value for Walman. It's an interesting gamble from both sides, it feels like.
Yeah, I think we actually may have talked about it at some point in the last.
We did, yeah.
Sure, maybe during the mailbag, maybe somebody asked about it, and I think that Walman does have a lot of value in the sense of able to play a lot of minutes and able to produce, and his contract next year is just 3.4. Let's not talk about what happened with Detroit and how San Jose got him for future considerations and a second round pick on top of that, because I don't know if that has a place in this. We're just talking about Jake Walman's value right now. Obviously, the asset management here is incredible, but I'm not sure. Again, we still know exactly why Detroit just had to get rid of Jake Walman and all that kind of all those details. I can tell you, people have asked me that, yeah, Jake has been, I think, a good citizen here, and he has been a good player. But as I've stressed a lot of times, that I feel like his game has a lot of flaws. And a lot of it is decision making with the puck, without the puck, and that he's not quite a refined kind of quote unquote winning player yet. And I wrote a story about that yesterday, my thoughts about both Walman and Zetterlund, basically. And there were questions I've asked, I think, all year on the podcast, and I've written about it before. So it's not kind of revisionist. In Mike, we trust logic that I'm trying to pull on you guys. I legitimately wondered if either of these guys, as productive and popular as they were if they were core pieces of the Sharks. And I think it's clear that Mike did not think so.
Yeah, seems like it.
Right, and so he waited for good value for sure. And we're gonna talk about. My first try at getting this right. Ostapchuk.
I think it's Ostapchuk.
Okay, I'm gonna
I think it's Ostapchuk. Or
Ostapchuk.
Ostapchuk, but we'll see.
We'll talk about that and the value of that in a little bit. But that's my biggest takeaway, that Walman, bridge player, but was he going to be somebody? He has a great contract next year, but he's then going to be a UFA. And at that point, was he going to be somebody that the Sharks were going to sign for a few more years and want to be around for the first Sharks playoff teams?
Yeah.
And I guess not.
Yeah, that's a very fair point. That's why I wasn't so upset with this trade. Because we had talked about many times, it's like, what do you do with Jake Walman? What do you do in a year when Jake Walman is going to be a UFA? Is he going to be paid like a top 4 on your team? And he's going to command, if he continues to play that many minutes for the Sharks, he's going to command a pretty good penny for UFA.
Right, yeah.
And, at his age and given some inconsistencies in his play, is that really who you want to have in your top 4? Is it more of a case of we just don't have anybody who's as good as Jake Walman right now, so he has to be there? And there is a lot of good things that Jake has brought out with his play and increased minutes this year. Obviously, Edmonton thinks that they can use him in his current form to lead to a deep playoff run. But I think you're right. I think it makes a little bit more sense for the Sharks to strike while the iron is hot. You turned nothing plus a second into another first round pick, even a year from now. If it's a conditional pick, so if they're, I think, a top 12, it will go to the 2027 first round pick. But yeah, you're just continuing to pile assets. I don't hate it. I think there will be equal, if not better, players on the UFA market or trade market for the defense this offseason. So yeah, you know what? I don't hate it. I wish Jake all the best, and Sharks defense will suffer badly in the next 20 games. But other than that, I think it's a good trade overall.
I talked with a couple of NHL amateur scouts, and I asked them, because teams obviously yesterday at the trade deadline, they were trying to get rid of their first round picks like they were third round picks.
Yeah, like candy, right?
And anyway, I asked them, is a 2026 first worth as much or more than a 2025 first, a late one? And they're like, yeah, it's a weak looking draft, which is what we told you when the Sharks made the Granlund and CC trade. That word was that it was a weak looking draft. So the 2026 is good. It's good that Edmonton doesn't have that. They already traded away their 2025. So I think you're happy to take a 2026 in this case.
Yeah, for sure. And it, if somehow it comes to a 2027 pick, then, who knows? But it's definitely, I think, especially because you already have two 2025 firsts right now, I don't think it makes sense to get a third one for this draft. So unless it was a top 15 pick or whatever, but
or if it's a deeper draft.
Yeah, exactly. So I like it. It was a good trade. I don't have much to say about Carl Berglund.
Yeah, he's an AHL guy. I talked with with somebody very familiar with the league, and he was like, no, this is not a guy with much of an NHL future in this expert's opinion.
What I liked about it, or what's interesting, is it seemed kind of like Grier was shopping both Ferraro and Walman to see what the deals were out there. It kind of felt like he knew that after he traded Walman that he would have to get a lot for Ferraro because he couldn't saddle like a team with nobody on their defense to actually.
He actually referred to that in his post trade deadline available yesterday. He said, once we traded Jake,
can't do it unless it was another first coming back or something.
Right. That's what I found out yesterday. And when I got up and started checking in with people or whatever, that the price for Ferraro was first plus, and that almost knocked me off of my bed.
Yeah. Well, I think
but
yeah.
But let me just add the point that I talked with a source about it, and I want to mention what he said because I think that it did make sense. And Grier basically confirmed the substance of this later, that not a super crazy ass. This is what my source said. I put in my article yesterday about the trade deadline buzz. Since he has another year left, it's a more crazy price if he's a rental, which he isn't.
Yep.
And yes, that's a high price, but that's just because San Jose needs him and probably doesn't really need to move him, they're both true.
Yeah. What was interesting about this deadline, just from a macro perspective, is a lot of players were moved with term on their deal, like with another year, which is not always the case. Like, obviously, there was a bunch of rentals moved as well, but it's not always the case that general managers are willing and wanting to have another year on the contract. And I think part of it is the rising cap. They don't feel as constrained. They're not worried that next year that guy's making $5 million. They're actually more. I think we're going to slowly transition the league from a cap, limit league to a more of an asset accumulation league, or more of having the pieces there because they're just not going to be available.
Well, that is until the GM spend out this cap money.
Well, yeah, that's true. And that's the problem.
They're going to be spending it like drunken sailors.
I know. But that's the problem.
These next couple of off seasons. And then we'll go back to a cap limit league.
Once the assets are no longer available, you start paying guys $6 million that are like third line centers that you shouldn't be paying $6 million, And then 3 years from now, they turn out to be. So that's what I mean. It's like, it's going to become more of a asset accumulation, asset management league, having the pieces, right? Like building those super teams rather than trying to finagle the cap, it feels like, which is what the past 8 years have been in the NHL, which is cap finagling, build a team from stars and scraps,
Yeah, hiding your players till the playoffs.
Exactly. It's interesting approach, more of an NBA style league. So just something to keep an eye on as we go forward. Gotta get those pieces. You got to get your Celebrinis and Smiths, but not a whole team full of them. It seems.
I gotta say, Mike misspoke there. You did definitely win with 12 Macklin Celebrinis. I'm sorry, no offense to Will Smith. Will Smith's been great the last month or so, but Macklin, his two-way game, you absolutely can win with 12 Macklin Celebrinis running around. So
yeah, the game would be hilarious if you had just 12 Macklin Celebrinis running around.
Oh, it'd be so annoying.
It'd be so annoying as shit.
I talked about that shift. Oh, I got so busy. I was gonna write about that Buffalo game, the last minute of the second period. I think I referenced Macklin putting the Sabres into his personal terror dome.
Yep.
And imagine having 3 guys at the same line playing the same way, just buzzing around and just
Yeah. Yeah.
just like basically just like velociraptors, basically having 3 velociraptors just buzzing around, just dousing cutting you.
Yeah, and keeping the puck, and you can't get it
Yeah.
back. Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right. We would win with 12 Celebrinis.
You would win with 12 Celebrinis.
12 Smiths would be fun, but I don't know if you would win.
Yeah, that's probably what Mike meant, but he didn't want to just put Will out there on his own ledge there.
Yeah. Quick aside, Will Smith's been awesome. I'm just going to mention that off the
Yes,
top.
yes.
He's been amazing the past couple weeks. Really, he's come into his own last
month, really.
Yeah, after the 4 Nations, he's looked fantastic.
Even before.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the week or so, a couple weeks before, he was looking really good too.
Yeah. So that's kind of it for Jake Walman. I thought it was interesting that we did end up keeping Ferraro. And I also think that Ferraro's play has been better of late versus Jake Walman's. Walman was very hot at the beginning of the season. He's not been bad. He's just been a little bit more turnover prone lately and hasn't been as productive as he was. So
sure,
kind of like trying to trade the asset at his very peak of value, and then you're keeping Ferraro for next year. So I like it overall.
Yeah. I know I'm a big proponent of you got to start building, which, but I'm not sure if Jake was a piece that I see as longish term. So I have no issues with it. I thought this was a very good trade, good value.
Yep.
And I really. Yeah, this is a much different trade than Blackwood and Granlund for different reasons. I do want to add a aside. I think some people are tired of hearing me talk about Granlund, but a couple of things though that I have learned recently that I mentioned in my trade deadline buzz blog, but I think are really worth reminding or worth kind of putting out there. We don't really have to talk about it, but I just want to make sure that I insert it. Is that I do continue to believe that Blackwood really wanted term, and we did see that in what he signed. So I still think that trade made sense for the Sharks, that is. And I did confirm, so I'd say this with no qualifications anymore, that Granlund would have signed a 3 to 4 year contract with the Sharks. So that changes the thinking about that trade, because I still do not like that trade. But anyway, let's move on.
Yeah, that's was part of the pre-deadline deals, right? Like he kind of lumped them all together, and his availability was a hard look at the roster and what they needed to move on from, and who was going to be a building piece for the future. And then he started to execute all the way back before the 4 Nations to trade Granlund and CC. So. Okay, so now the most controversial deal of the night, of the day, was Fabian Zetterlund, Tristan Robbins, 2025 fourth for Ottawa's 2025 second, Zach Ostapchuk, and Noah Gregor. And obviously the biggest piece of this is Noah Gregor. So let's talk about Noah Gregor. I think that's it's just weird to me. I don't understand the point of, I get it. Contracts have to go back and forth, but why did we get Noah Gregor back? I don't even think Gregor really wanted to be here at the end of his stay here.
Well, I would say a couple things to that point, though, that Gregor and Ferraro are really, really good friends.
That's good.
After the recent Ottawa game, a week ago, after the game in the hallway, I saw them chatting it up, and they're really, really good friends. Good. And also, too, I think a lot of Gregor's issue last time he was here was with David Quinn, and David Quinn isn't here anymore. So it's sort of a fresh start with him. Granted, Warsawski is part of Quinn's staff, but still, it's a different head coach. So I think those are a couple of things. And also, too, I think that the Senators probably just needed to, besides the contract thing that you mentioned, which is always a big part of these trades. That's why Carl Berglund was in that trade, because that's just a contract thing. But also, too, the Sharks need bodies that to just kind of help them keep them afloat for 18 games here. I think Gregor's an RFA after the season, so honestly, I have no idea if he's a guy that they're going to bring back or not. Probably not, because I mean they didn't last time, but they need NHL caliber-ish players around. And Ottawa probably acquiring Zetterlund, and with their system or whatever, they just had no space.
Yeah.
And Gregor is going to be like the 14th forward in Ottawa or something, right? And so in San Jose, well, he's like he's like the 9th best forward or something.
Maybe
on the Sharks.
Maybe.
So yeah. So there's a reason for it, but yeah, he's not a value add. I don't think that this was like a sticking point to the trade.
Yeah.
So the order importance of assets is Ostapchuk. Okay, Ostapchuk.
Ostapchuk.
That's better.
I don't know. We'll have to have him pronounce.
Well, yeah, we're just gonna say. I'm just gonna say. Yeah, actually, I might ask him today. Morning skate's gonna be. Oh, he's not there yet though. He's with the Barracuda. Anyway,
I listened to some games. I watched some Ostapchuk tape, which we'll talk about. But people pronounce it Ostapchuk and Ostapchuk. Also Ohopschuk, which is
Ohopschuk,
which is not right.
Okay.
So I think it's Ostapchuk.
That doesn't sound
right. I don't know. Have him pronounce it when he gets here.
Order of asset importance, all right, is according to Mike Grier is Ostapchuk. I'm just gonna say it that way. The rest of the show, you guys can correct me. 2nd round pick, nice. And then Gregor is here. No offense to Gregor. Gregor is an AHL player, but it's just not. It is a throw-in of sorts. And so yeah, so that's.
And on the other side, it's like Fabian Zetterlund. Probably the 4th.
I didn't think that they were going to resign Tristan Robbins. That's the area indication I was hearing. Talking with scouts who have watched a lot of Robbins, not enough development, so it just wasn't happening there. So yeah, so that was. I know some fans would be like, "Oh, he's a 2nd round pick," but
kind of sad because I liked a lot of what Robbins was going to bring to the AHL. It seemed like he never adapted to that style of play, and he had brief moments where he has. He's got a good wrist shot. He's got a okay hockey IQ. Can make plays when he has the puck. He just doesn't get the puck back a lot. Doesn't have a lot of forechecking. Doesn't provide anything particularly defensively. Or occasionally he'll be an okay power play player, but it's not like he was any better than Bordelot or Gushin or any of the vets on the CUDA for like 2 or 3 years now. So yeah, I had kind of had hopes for Robbins when he came out of the WHL, but it never came together for him, which is kind of sad.
Yeah, he was profiling as a bottom 6 center, like at best in the NHL, but at his size and his kind of his skating is good, but it's not premium.
Yep.
It wasn't gonna happen.
Mm-hmm.
He's the kind of guy that he needed to have a chance to be like just very productive at NHL level at his size, like a Gushin. He's got to have the possibility that he can pop in 20, 25 goals at NHL level to have a job in NHL. And that wasn't looking like that was going to happen. So yeah, that's just one of those, it's common small forward thing. So there's kind of a little bit of a boom bust. I know that's not totally accurate in Tristan's case. Tristan can PK, he can do all those things, but not at the NHL level though.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's hopes that he could like either form such a well-rounded game that he could become a bottom 6 forward,
right?
Or that he could develop his offensive skills enough, but neither one happened.
Which was I think that they really hoped when they drafted him, but yeah,
neither one happened. So it's unfortunate, but I think we should talk about the other pieces of the deal. Who do you want to start with, Zetterlund or Ostapchuk?
I guess we can start with Zetterlund since we were talking on the San Jose side. So Zetterlund, again, I had the same questions. Like I really liked the fans. Personality was great. His friendship with William Eklund, how he developed. I love the story of a guy started last year as a 4th liner and worked his way up to the 1st line. I love the story of the guy that went goalless in his first 22 games in San Jose. Everybody thought he was a total bust. And so there's a lot that I liked about his story, and he did develop himself into a good player. But was he, again, a player that was a core piece? the Sharks, he was going to go to arbitration. The Sharks had total control over him. So that whole contract thing that a lot of people were focused on at first, right? And I checked in on it too. That there was not Mike Grier said it, and I don't think that he was. There was Mike Grier, no cap.
No cap.
That it wasn't. I don't think it was a contract thing.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard the figures, and it was a typical. Okay, maybe Zetterlund's asking for something a little high.
Sure.
Maybe the Sharks are going a little low, but in arbitration, that's what happens, right? And then as you get closer to arbitration, and you usually don't even get to the hearing, but if you get to the hearing, you just kind of meet in the middle. And I'll give you an example of one from last year. Kirill Marchenko is an example. And Kirill, it really has exploded this year, so it may not seem like the right comparison. But if you look at Kirill's first 2 years, productivity is not that dissimilar to Fabian Zetterlund last year and this year so far.
Yeah.
And so that's probably where they would have ended up, something like that. But and also too with a bridge term too. So that's another thing too. So the dollar figures weren't ridiculous on either side. The term wasn't ridiculous. It wasn't like Fabian Zetterlund was demanding a 7-year contract or 6-year contract, or the Sharks wanted Fabian to sign like a 6-year contract for like a low AAV or just anything. There was nothing outlandish in any of this. It's just that Mike Grier seems to really, really like Ostapchuk.
Yeah.
And I think that's the long and short of it, that they did want to sign Zetterlund. And when that didn't work instantly, then they kind of listened around the league, and there was a player that Mike really liked. And Ottawa maybe was reluctant to trade him at first. And when Ottawa was willing to let him go, Ostapchuk, then it started to become a reality.
Yeah. I initially was very upset about this trade. I have
I could tell.
I have calmed down a little.
You and Anne were crashing. We're crashing
out. Anna freaked out. Anna loves Fabian Zetterlund. That's like her favorite. Basically, the Sharks keep trading all of her favorite players, and she gets very upset about it. She loved Jasper Weatherby because, I don't know, she liked the story and that his name was Weatherby. Sure. She loved Fabian Zetterlund. She picks a player and then waits for Mike Grier to trade him. So, but I think it was not just her, right? A lot of Sharks fans liked the kinship that he seemed to develop with William Eklund. Yeah. They liked his energy, his, he's got a great he's just a great work ethic, a great story.
Quadzilla.
He's a tank, he's a unit, he's a Swedish meatball. He seemed like such a good story and a good fit for the organization. And it also was like a little bit of a Sharks pro scouting win, right? Like you mentioned, he didn't look great in his first 22 games, but then started to blossom into a very decent middle six winger, right? Like that's what I see as second, third line tweener guy that is not just like a fill-in second, third line tweener. Like he could do well on your team in that role. Probably third line if you're a great team. But he would do really well in that role. He's got the energy. He forechecks well. He hits well. He has got a great shot. He can occasionally connect some plays, although I think his playmaking is probably playmaking and puck carrying are his weakest parts of his game.
Right. And then also defensive reads were not consistent. Yeah. And also too, he sort of has this very intense bowling ball style, but wasn't always there. He could be perimeter at times, I think.
Yeah.
And so I think that's
part of the problem.
It's not a pile on Fabian Zetterlund thing, but this was a flawed player though. Same with Jake Walman. And that's why, again, I wondered, and I wrote about it too, like, is this a guy that is core or bridge?
So I would say, I mean, obviously Mike Grier decided that he was not a core piece. And I understand why he did that and what he traded for. We'll talk about in a little bit. I feel like we don't have enough Fabian Zetterlunds to be like, yeah, it's fine. We can find more later. Like other pieces could be more valuable. It's a lot of question marks. It's a lot of hypothetical. It's a lot of hopefulness that players turn out to be as good as Fabian Zetterlund is right now.
Sure. That's fair.
So I don't know. I think it also helps to lessen the blow of trading guys like Timo Meier, because you got a guy that you really like on your team for the future, and he likes being here, supposedly, theoretically.
Who's as productive as Timo, as everyone likes to remind
as productive as Timo,
for a quarter of the price.
I get what Mike Grier is thinking, in that guys like Zetterlund are easier to find than guys like what Ostapchuk could be.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we don't have those guys, and we also don't have the camaraderie in this dressing room to just be like, yeah, we'll figure it out later. And it's the same argument that you had with Michael Granlund, but it's
Sure.
Mikael Granlund. But Granlund obviously is a way better player and way harder to find, but it still is it's a question mark of what do you do with this locker room now that you just keep trading guys that are well liked by fans and by their teammates. And I'm mad about it. I'm not as mad as yesterday, but I'm sad.
Yeah. I hear you as a fan. And it is sort of a junior version of the Granlund argument.
Yeah.
Zetterlund wasn't the leader that Granlund was, but still, I get what you're saying, though. Mike did offer a lot of hopium in his trade deadline availability yesterday, talking about, hey, we have big scoring wingers coming. We have Musty. We have Chernyshov. They're not coming next year, not at least at a 20 goal, play him 18 minutes a night kind of rate, at least.
Yeah.
But to your point, and you do touch on this too, that if you're going to sign somebody in free agency to kind of replicate some of the production, that you're more likely to be able to do that and find a guy like a Zetterlund.
It's true.
It won't replicate the like you mentioned, the camaraderie and the popularity among fans, but skill set of a 20, still a one-dimensionalish winger, though he's got a little more power to his game, so and whatnot. But you can find that, and I think that's what Mike the way. I'm not
you're
sure.
Just going to overpay.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you're ready to talk about Ostapchuk, but the way that a league source put it to me that made sense was that Mike calculated that he could lose some goal scoring and add a premium position center, a guy that could potentially be your. I don't want to use Mike mentioned it, but Mike wasn't. It wasn't a direct comparison, so I want to be very, very clear about what Mike said there. But he did cite Adam Lowry as the type.
Yeah,
and I wrote a story and I thought about what's the last time the Sharks had a legitimate top defensive stopper center.
Michael Handzus, maybe?
No, it was Barclay Goodrow in that season that we didn't realize that he was worth a first rounder until he was traded, and he helped Tampa Bay win 2 Stanley Cups. But that's what Barclay Goodrow was in 2019-20.
Sure.
And that's the last time the Sharks had anybody like that. And so if Ostapchuk can be even half that or half of Adam Lowry, who's one of the best third line centers in the league, or maybe 3/4, maybe not half, 3/4 or something, then this is a very, very valuable player.
And these guys
more valuable than Zetterlund.
And these guys are littered around the league that you see. Michael Handzus is a great shout, but he had a little bit more skill.
Right, in his prime,
in his prime for sure. But he is one of those guys that later in his career, or even towards the late career, he was like, this is your third line defensive center. He's going to win you a bunch of draws. He's going to win you games. And that's true.
Yeah. Chip in 10, 15 goals.
Yep. And, guys like Nick Dowd nowadays, and
Dowd's more of a fourth line. Dowd's like the
Yeah.
best in class fourth line.
Exactly. So
Lowry's best in class third line center. Yeah.
So I think if you're somewhere between those two,
Right.
like best in class fourth to third line center, I think you're winning in this trade. But there's still a lot of ifs because like while these guys,
Right.
these types are around the league, then you see them, you have to like this guy has to make it in that route. It's most often that these guys don't. The guys that produce like Ostapchuk does, the guys that that are drafted where they are and develop like they have, by the numbers don't really pan out that well. So you need a lot of them before one of them to make it. The pro scouting staff has identified him as like the one that will, and that's like hell of a bet, right?
Right.
That's a hell of a gamble.
Right.
That being said, I understand why. It's interesting because he has basically he went to the AHL last year. He did okay. He was like 0.5 points per game coming out of the juniors. And then stuck with Ottawa most of this year as their fourth line center, basically just stuck there in that position. It's also very rare for a guy that is that new to get a good faceoff rate, but he was like a 50% faceoff man this year, which is impressive. And then was recently sent back down to the AHL for the past couple of games, in which he's done well. He's had 11 points in 15 games in the AHL this year as a 21-year-old. So I see why, and I watched a lot of his I watched his junior tape, and then I watched an AHL tape because I wanted to see if there was growth and change. And I get it. Like, he does play like an NHL player. You could tell even from juniors in 2021 that he played like an NHLer. The details. Yeah, he knows how to chip and chase. He knows how to get around guys. He knows how to forecheck, lift sticks. He knows how to win faceoffs. He knows how to get back off the rush. He does all those little things that you're like, yeah, okay, he's probably going to play in the league.
And Zetterlund, I think, was still learning that too. More so than
I think defensively for sure. Yeah, he definitely was. The difference is obviously like the offensive ceiling. I think Ostapchuk does have some good hands for how big he is. I really actually think he's got some nice hands. And he's got good skating. I just think there's a lot to say about his ability to connect plays and everything, but I don't think that's what they're caring about. I really don't. Yeah. I think they want him to grind it out, play the bottom six, and win faceoffs, play defensively, play PK. And I think if they take that mold and they put it onto him, that he seems like he could develop into that with their coaching. So I don't hate it. I just am sad.
Yeah. I totally get that. I don't have any argument for that.
Yeah.
If Ostapchuk hits, he might be a bigger, better Luke Kunin.
Might be, yeah.
He's not going to excite a lot of fans, but
I think Kunin honestly is like a worse Zetterlund overall. Like Kunin's a better, like, I don't know. He's got some better defensive capabilities in PK work, but I think he's
I hear what you're saying with that.
Just a worse Zetterlund. So anyway, I don't know. I think it's an interesting bet. It adds some definite size into our bottom six for next year. Right. And I think that they were hoping that Philip Bstat would turn this corner into this player, but he hasn't yet. So still time for him too. He's a year younger than Ostapchuk, but it seems interesting that they targeted another big center into that slot. So,
well, Bstat I don't think has the meanness that Grier talked about. Also, that penchant to stand up for his guys, yes. Like Grier was very clear to talk about with Ostapchuk.
Mm-hmm.
So doesn't mean that Bstat can't develop into a player, but Bstat's a little more of a finesse player, so you might have to be more productive at the NHL to make it. Or maybe Ostapchuk becomes your dream fourth line center, and Bstat becomes, if everything works out, like your Wenberg, like an overqualified third line center, and then Smith and Celebrini, and then you're super stacked down the middle. I mean, it's really, really hard to say, but it is interesting how Grier has really targeted that big center When we're not talking about the premium skill guys like Smith and Celebrini, where they're not the tallest, biggest guys, but they are so skilled and Celebrini so well rounded that it doesn't matter their size, right? But when we get later in the draft, Beasted's an example of it. Trading for Edstrom, Brandon Swoboda is another contender for that 4C spot in the future.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously now with Ostapchuk, that this is a profile of a player that Grier is looking for sure.
And this one at least is knocking on the door of the NHL. The other
Right.
ones are still kind of in the waiting. I think Grier sees him after trading Nico Sturm, like next year, probably starting him at 4C and seeing if he can hack it, you know?
Yes, yeah, good point.
There is a great article out on The Athletic about Zacho Stapchuk from a few years ago, related to him losing his father when he was 14 and how it impacted his career and his development. So he seems like such a good kid that's also probably a part of why they targeted him. He just seems like such a hardworking kid. And also the meanness too. Like he sticks up for players. He fights. He can be a little bit mean. I was reading more game reports of him, just because I only got to see a few games, and people do mention that he does kind of, I don't know if the word float is the right one, not float, but like just doesn't seem as to be engaged other than going through the routines at times. But that's pretty typical of any bottom six forward. So, and also learning your way in the league at 21 and fourth line center it's a tough role. So
yeah.
And he did pretty admirably throughout the whole year, it sounds like, from Sens fans. So I don't know. I'm interested. I'm a little sad. I think it's kind of it's a gamble, and I think there is a lot more. Like, I think if you were, that's why I also agree. I don't think Grier was actually worried about the contract, because if he's going to have to get somebody like Zetterlund in free agency, he's going to pay like $4 or $5 million.
Yeah.
So yeah, and he's probably going to have to do that if he wants to replace that production, or hope that Musty or Chernyshov are ready, or Halton.
No, I don't think I think Mike Grier Grier is a smart hockey man. I don't think he's counting on Musty and Chernyshov in the lineup next year. Counting on. Yeah. You're hoping, of course, but if you're counting on them, then you're really setting yourself for another long season. But I think what I might close with, kind of wrapping up Walman, Zetterlund, and Ostapchuk, I want to make it clear that Walman and Zetterlund are good players, and they can be good players on winning teams. But I think using a hockey cliche to make it maybe crystallize or make sense is that Ostapchuk is seen as a player that the hockey cliche drag people into the fight. There's not a ton of players like that, to be honest. If you look at the Sharks the last few years, who are guys like that? Macklin is a guy like that. They're always just trying to pull you into the middle of the ice, pull you into competing to the last inch. Mario Ferraro is a guy like that. Even Evander Kane was honestly a guy like that too on the ice. A couple other guys you can think of too, but these guys are not that common. And Ostapchuk is seen as a guy in that kind of realm of player. Whereas Walman and Zetterlund, as good as they are, and as sort of spirited as they can be at times on the ice, I don't think they are seen as guys that quote unquote drag you to the fight. Yeah. And Mike Grier wants guys like that. And that's clear. That's clear as day. That's might be the number one thing he wants of a player, maybe, if in terms of a guy that he wants to build around. But yeah. And so I think that might be a way to maybe make it make more sense that Walman and Zetterlund are going to be complementary pieces on a good team, and they're good enough for that. But that, are they going to be the leaders? I don't know. I'm not really sure, right? Whereas Ostapchuk, while he is just 21, so it is a huge if, that the potential is very, very clearly there for him to be alternate captain of the Sharks of the future, that kind of player. And I'm not sure if that exists so much for Walman or Zetterlund, that kind of profile of player. And so I think that that's a big part of it. And finally, too, and I wrote about this in my story too, that this is going to be a big test if you're a Mike Grier truther. that Ostapchuk, yeah, you knew what you had in Zetterlund, so you're taking a big risk here in Ostapchuk. And so, do you trust Mike Grier? And I guess I'll give you my answer. We'll have a final trade deadline grade at the end of the show here. So,
Yeah.
but
I still
anyway,
do. I
yeah.
do trust Mike Grier. I
Okay.
think I understand that. I understand at least the pro scouting aspect of it. I think they've proven.
But you're
that they-
sad.
No, I think they actually
get it.
do. They've proven that they can. They still do have to prove that they could build an entire team, but we'll talk.
Right.
Yeah, and that was also one thing I wanted to mention about Ostapchuk was he invites contact, he invites battling on the boards. He drag you into the fight is a good way to put it.
Yeah. I don't know if Walman and Zetterlund do those things. They don't, not all the time.
Yeah. So I'm a little sad overall, but I understand why he did it. I think it yeah, we'll talk about trade grades later on. But any other things to mention about the other trades that happened this week? Kunin, Sturm, Vanacek, Desharnais. I have one, but you can go first.
You know what's funny is you turned the Kunin thing into a bit, so everyone asked how I was doing after the
I know.
got traded. Honestly, though, and if you guys really listen and follow and read my game stories, the player that I really love was Sturm, actually.
Yeah, that's actually true.
and I've actually said that before, that when the Sharks were at their worst, that the player that I liked watching the most was probably Sturm at times, because he just played. He was like a metronome. He didn't change the way he played at all.
Mm-hmm.
And when he did change the way he played, I think I observed it in that Vancouver 10-1 loss last year. Maybe it was the Pittsburgh one. I was like, oh, Sharks are in real trouble.
Yeah.
If Nico Sturm is trying to force offense through the neutral zone. And also too, Sturm was also too, as you can see in the stories that I've written about him, and that you've heard in any interview, that he was one of the most insightful Sharks that we've ever had in media.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
You talked about how Anna crashed out over Zetterlund. I'm a reporter. You know who I crashed out over? Losing guys who give great quotes.
Who give you the actual time of day to formulate good hockey opinions. That's sad.
Yeah. So that's the real tragedy for me.
Mm-hmm.
I like Luke a lot, but Luke was not as talkative as Nico in any sense of the word. Luke was overall a better player than Sturm, but yeah, I just think that that's funny that
everybody made fun of Kunin being traded, but
but you missed my heart, guys.
Yeah, real heart was Nico Sturm. It was actually Mikhail Granlund. We didn't know until he was traded. That was the real heart.
Oh, I did really, I did like watching Mikhail Granlund. Was like watching Mighty Mouse out there.
Yeah.
But as for the other trades, Desharnais is an interesting one. I think he signed for next year. He's overpaid a little bit.
Yeah.
I have stories on actually both Desharnais and Ostapchuk. I've spoken a lot of scouts about them. I think Desharnais is a good sort of bridge option for next year. I think that's the way to look at it. And he's probably a good replacement for Jan Ruda, who they weren't able to trade because Ruda is hurt, and Ruda's going to be a UFA. So I suspect that the right-handed PK shutdownish role that Desharnais, he will get that over Ruda, and then be a trade deadline candidate next year, Desharnais. And credit to Gabe Carrier for getting that NHL contract.
Yeah.
And my writer Felicia Keller wrote an excellent story about Gabe Carrier a couple weeks ago. And Vitek Vanacek, that one is a little odd. That one we didn't get to ask Mike about, and I'm not sure if they like Patrick Gillis as a sort of a tweener center, a guy that can slide up and down AHL, NHL. There is some AHL potential with Gillis, even though he's 25, unlike a Berglund, who's also 25. But what they're doing to Georgi Romanov is really curious, though, because they ended up basically keeping him up. And even Mike admitted that, we tried to trade for a goalie, and ideally Romanov would be available for the AHL playoff run, but he's not going to be.
Yep.
And
I wanted to ask
yeah,
about
why
that
didn't they just
'cause
keep Vanacek? Yeah, which of course, that's a
sure.
question, right? So which we
Well,
didn't ask. But go ahead.
what I thought was interesting was because they had to send down players by the trade deadline to be able to be eligible for the playoffs. But I wonder if there
Right.
were roster restrictions, or could you run one goalie, right? Like, could they just theoretically for an hour have one goalie and then have sent Romanoff down,
Hmm.
or were there roster restrictions on that, and that's why they didn't do it, you know?
That's Mike didn't explain that, and I don't think there are. I think they could have sent Romanov
And it
down.
makes no sense to have not done it, but
I'm not really
I,
sure. That's good point.
it might have
Maybe
been restrictions, right? Because like you
yeah,
might
there
have to.
may have been a right now restriction, but then though
Mhm.
they could have signed Arundel. They could have actually they could have.
Unless they were at the contract limit or something.
I
Or
don't
no,
think
they're at
they
44
were.
contracts by at least by this website, but
Yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe there's more complications that Mike didn't explain. But the point of it though is that
yeah, it won't be available.
Romanov's not going to be available for the playoffs, which is, of course, you expect Askarov to be your number one guy throughout the playoffs. But if he got hurt or whatever, why not Romanov going in as you would want Romanov to be your second guy going in
Mm.
over Carrier or Arundel?
Yeah, I don't really get that
So,
bit. Unless he,
it's yeah,
uh,
a little curious there.
yeah, I mean, good for Romanov because he now gets an NHL paycheck probably
Yeah,
for the
that's
next
true.
2 months, so he's
That's true.
probably pretty jazzed about that actually.
That's true.
But
That part is good. Yeah.
um, because he's gonna probably be up here until Askarov's healthy at least, and he's gonna need time in the AHL anyway. So
And they
and
could still send Romanov for the regular season to
they could,
back down there, so he'll get some games down there, I bet, as Askarov gets healthier. But
yeah,
it's still a curious thing there for sure. Yeah.
doesn't
Oh,
really make sense. Yeah, go ahead.
I do want to tease one thing too. I have a amazing. Speaking of Nico Sturm, I have an amazing. This is one of my favorite stories. It's not done yet, but
Mm,
it's I'll just tease. It's one of the if it all comes together as hoped, and it is, I'll tease halfway done. So it's
mhm.
not like I'm not just teasing something that's just in the air now. It's halfway done. That is going to be one of the better stories ever on San Jose Hockey Now, and it
Wow.
involves Nico Sturm. And I just love it, and I hope that it can get completed. And so that's just a little tease. So
All right. I'm excited to read it.
love you,
Uh,
Nico.
this was the real heart. See, we thought this would be the last time we hear about Luke Kunin. It's actually, we're gonna have to hear about Nico Sturm too.
I like players you win with though, and
Yeah.
Nico you do win with. Maybe not this Sharks team, obviously, but you needed also Nathan
Well, he's
McKinnon
going to the
and
Panthers,
Nico
right?
Rantanen, right? So yeah, so right, the Panthers see him as a player that can win with.
Yeah.
You also win with guys like Luke Kunin. I like that, and Ostachuk too is quote
In that mold.
cliche player you win with, player who will drag you into the fight. So,
I
but he's
I want to
younger, and that's
I
a
want
big
to give
part
a
of it.
quick shout to the Desharnais trade because I
Hmm.
actually
Okay.
weirdly I like it.
Okay.
I understand that Desharnais has now been passed around like 3 NHL clubs at this point. Like he was Vancouver, then he was Pittsburgh, now he's San Jose
Right.
in like the span of a month, which is never a good sign for a player. But he has some nastiness. He's got some
Hmm.
physicality to him. Sharks do not have anyone that right now that kind of fits that mold on the right side. Ruda
Hmm.
did okay for the last couple of years, and he's a better puck mover, better offensive player than Desharnais will ever be. But I think he has a role as your number 6 defensive defenseman.
Hmm.
And with the Sharks, he kind of slots in there perfectly for that role right now. So I think it's a good, and he's signed for next year. So people are going to say, well, yes, he's blocking X, Y, and Z prospects from coming up, but I don't think he is. There's not
He's
guys
not.
that are
Yeah.
like him that we have in the pool. And
Right.
he's also right-handed, which the Sharks have very little of in general. So, um, yeah, I don't think he is. He's just a guy that is going to kind of plug and play for the next year and a half, and see if we can rebuild his value to maybe even go for a trade next deadline. So I don't hate it. I think it's a great pickup.
2028 fifth. We talked about this.
It's
Doesn't matter. This
not matter.
you'll get that pick back in a year or two.
Yeah.
And in terms of the blocking,
Hmm.
if you cannot take David Desharnais' job or Jan
Vincent.
Ruda's job or et cetera, right?
Hmm.
Like you're not quite ready for for the show.
NHL.
If you can't take a number 6 defenseman's job, number 7's defenseman's job, if that's what's blocking you, then you're not really NHL defenseman yet.
Yeah. And I think they saw Jack Thompson has some good qualities to him in the offensive zone, but I think defensively he still has a lot to work on.
Very,
And they
very,
were
very raw.
They were like, we can't. Let's at least try this guy who's been in the NHL for a few years to try into his slot. So, and then Thompson and Schultz were both sent back down, and Henry Thrun was activated from IR. So it seems like our 6 defensemen are going to be Vlasic, Ferraro, Liljegren, Desharnais, Thrun, and Mukhamadullin for the rest of the year.
Hey, credit to Mukhamadullin that he's.
Yeah.
I think for a bold, I was thinking about this. I got to listen back, but I think for a bold prediction, I said that Mukhamadullin would become a top pairing defenseman for the Sharks in this calendar year, which also includes next season. And I didn't quite mean it this way.
Technically, he was on the first pairing against Colorado. Which
technically, I mean, who is Ferraro is ahead of him on the depth chart. Liljegren too, even though he's on a different pairing. Mukhamadullin might be the Sharks' 3rd best defenseman right now. I mean, now Desharnais, I guess, in the picture too, but maybe Thrun now. But there's an argument now.
Yeah, and I will say the Sharks have fulfilled my 2 holiday wishes. I wanted another first-round pick. We got 2 of them, which did not think that they would. And then I wanted a more comfortable Mukhamadullin. That was the exact words I used. It was like more comfortable, and he is. This dude he's more comfortable. I think the Colorado game was too much for Mukhamadullin.
That was too much for everybody. So
too much for everybody.
We're gonna erase that
but
from our collective memories.
But
we're gonna stick with the good vibes of Buffalo and the sleepover, and then now we're after the trade deadline.
Yeah, that was a horrific game. But I think everybody's a little distracted that game, and Colorado is like, how do we take advantage of just the most overmatched?
And they did, yeah.
Yeah, it was bad. Anyway, I really do. I think Mukhamadulin's done great. I've been shouting him out on Twitter every single game because I feel like there's a lot more developing with him there, and you could see he's getting a little more comfortable. He's taking a little bit more time with the puck, even past couple games. So I think Mike Grier is also seeing some development there and is keeping him up for a bit.
Yeah, I want to mention too that I think I said this a couple weeks ago too, that the games against like the best teams, elite teams, Colorado with McKinnon and Makar, Dallas, the Sharks lost 8-3 before 4 Nations. Those are games that Sharks have no chance in unless their goalie stands under head or Colorado shows up to the game hungover, honestly.
Basically.
There really is no chance. It's the games against tonight, it's the New York Islanders, the mid teams, Montreal, Vancouver, Buffalo, right? Where the Sharks really need to show up for. And they've been doing that so far. And I think those are the ones where I'm really looking for, okay, you can beat this team if you're at least, you don't have to be perfect, but at least if you're pretty good. And if you keep that centered up, you can also kind of leak out points or eke out points against Toronto, win against Toronto, actually, or Winnipeg, get them to overtime, things like that, right? So that's sort of the bar that we're talking about. But then when Colorado's firing on all cylinders, Dallas is firing on all cylinders, Georgiev is not, or whoever, Vanacek is not on top of his game, no chance. And you got to accept that. This is where the team is at.
Yeah, there's a huge gap, and the gap is getting bigger, it feels like, for those top teams.
Dallas just added Rantanen, casually.
Dallas added Rantanen. Florida's like, let's get
Colorado
Marsha,
with Nelson.
Coyle.
Oh, can I say this too? Mike did not like this question, but I think it was a very fair question. I knew he wouldn't like it though.
Which one?
Well, that they traded if they were going to trade Granlund and CC, and everyone knows my feelings about Granlund, but that they traded him too fast, right? Because look what Brock Nelson got. Granlund was, wouldn't you say, their third best center that moved at the deadline, right? Nelson is ahead of him because Nelson's bigger, kind of the whole playoff thing, right? And also Nelson in past years has been a much better goal scorer, and then JT Miller, obviously. But Granlund was your third best center of the deadline then who moved.
Probably.
And even Cody Ceci, who is not a remarkable defenseman, but look at how some of the guys went for at the end there, and the Sharks hoping for a first for Ferraro, and guys like Luke Shen getting a second and a fourth, and a couple other guys, right? That it seems to me that they jumped the gun with that, and I know that there was some worry that Granlund could get hurt at Four Nations, of course, right? But I mean, there's the same concern about Brock Nelson playing for USA and other guys. So it's not like Granlund was the only guy playing, only premium trade deadline center playing at Four Nations. So it seems to me that there was a jumping of the gun there, and Dallas took advantage of it because they added a versatile top six center winger in Granlund, and then a guy in CC that they can kind of plug and play up and down their defense for, I think, 75% of the price that they would have paid if the Sharks had held them a little longer.
Yeah, possibly. I think maybe they could have improved the return slightly.
This might lead to our last topic, actually, the trade deadline grade.
Yeah, but you then run the risk of, I think Luke Kunin's a good example that you run the risk of over asking and then getting beat out, right? Like Luke Kunin got traded.
I don't think so though, because again, Granlund was the third best center in a center poor market in a position of demand. Kunin's had a nice season and talked about his improvements, but Kunin is not a premium center by any stretch.
Yeah, I don't know. I just mean that the teams out there that are going to try and acquire him, they might have targeted guys like Brock Nelson above him.
Sure.
So, and then
but say Toronto that gave a first for Lofton, right? They may have given more for Granlund. I don't know. I mean, a different profile player, but
they could have given a first in Gurbankin, I guess, because it seems like they were trying to sell Gurbankin. But I don't know. I think the other problem is like the teams typically value guys like Lawton and Nelson more than they value guys like Granlund. But
yes and no. I mean, Granlund's only drawback is his size. It's not the way he plays, though. I don't think anyone would ever argue that part of it. And so, if you can kind of overlook that a little bit, I mean, he plays like a big man. Is I guess the point I'm trying to make. So, yeah. Anyway,
I don't know. I would. Yeah, he did it early. He also, honestly, I think started not started it, but at least reinforced that this is going to be a seller's deadline. Like it felt like, oh wow, okay, Granlund can get you a first. Oh, then that means Scott Lawton can get you a first. Brock Nelson's going to get you a first. Your X, Y, and Z good player is going to get you a first round pick, and it felt like a very much a seller's deadline. That
like I kept repeating, getting a first for a top center was that's like the bar from last year.
Yeah.
But we saw during the deadline and leading up to right before the deadline, we saw the overpayments.
Yeah.
Like, look, Brock Nelson's a great player, but Callum Ritchie and a first?
Yeah, that's crazy.
Right?
But I don't think you would get Callum Ritchie in a first.
No, I understand. I agree. But would you have got, like, say, a first and a second, maybe? Or probably a first and a good prospect, not a great prospect, but a good prospect?
Probably.
I think very possibly, right? So, yeah.
What I was trying to say about the Luke Kunin thing is if you wait too long, though, you run out. Because, like, guys like Beauvillier got a second, and then all of a sudden, 15 minutes before the deadline's over, Kunin's getting a fourth. And it's because he ran out of spots to take Kunin.
Right. I hear you on that, but we're just talking about different players, though. Like, if you want to say, like, Kunin and Sturm, because, like, Sturm probably took, like, Kunin's spot in Florida. Like, that's the same profile-ish of player, right? Sure, when we're talking about a player like that, but in this market, though, that I don't think that would have happened. A team would have made a spot for a guy like Granlund because that was his value at the deadline.
Yeah. Well, he is a bird in the hand kind of GM, that Mike Grier.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
He really is.
That's an accurate way to put it. Yeah.
He gets the deal and then he goes, yep. And then he does it.
Yeah.
And he did the same thing with Zetterlund, and he wanted a player and then he did it.
Yeah.
So we'll see if that pans out. But what are we getting our final trade grades before we get out of here? It's gonna be a shorter episode, which is interesting. But what are you gonna give him?
Are we counting back to Blackwood and Granlund? Or are we talking strictly deadline?
I feel like we kind of already gave grades for Blackwood and Granlund.
Okay,
So I feel
fair.
like if we lump them in, it's going to skew it. So we should
Okay.
probably just do the trade deadline deals.
Okay. I will say a B minus.
Mhm.
I think that the Walman trade was an A trade for value.
Sure.
And I wasn't convinced that Walman was a guy that was necessarily a core piece. And so that made total sense to me.
Yeah.
Why you make that trade. The Zetterlund one, I am open-minded about. I don't know enough about a stop check. Like I said, I've talked to a lot of people. I've heard some promising things. I've heard some not so promising things about his ceiling and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so I'm reserving judgment on that one just because I don't know the player. And I get the idea of it though.
Mhm.
And so I wouldn't give that trade by itself an F grade. I give that trade like a C-ish grade, the wait and see kind of thing, right?
Sure.
Because and so that's why that brings down the overall grade. Other trades, Kunin, I think the Sharks were hoping for a third. That's what I heard. But then, like you mentioned, that trade happened like 15 minutes before the deadline. So just take what you can get if you're not going to bring him back. Sturm getting a fourth for him. Granted, you had to tag on a seventh, but who cares about that? Yeah, so that's fine. Vajic and Gillies. Well, if you like Gillies, again, that is a little weird with the whole Romanov situation and why you just to keep both of them, but whatever. Descharnay, it's fine. 2028 fifth doesn't matter. So the rest of those deals, Kunin, Sturm, Vanacek, and Desharnais, it's about what you expect at the deadline. So my grade is based on Walman, which I give an A. Zetterlund, that trade, it's like a C for me. So overall, like I said, B minus.
Giving a C plus. He passed. Okay. He passed, but I wasn't. There were good trades. I like.
That's for you, Fabian.
That's for you, Fabian. C plus.
Never got to ask Macklin. Macklin called Fabian and after Buffalo, like Fabe or something. Like
Fabe.
I didn't get to ask
Fabio?
Macklin, like, is that his nickname, Fabe? And I guess it's not that funny anymore, but now it's sad.
Yeah.
But
I think
that's
I'm giving
Listen
it.
back to the post game press conference against Buffalo, and that's what he called Fabian Zetterlund, Fabe. Anyway,
yeah, I'm giving him a C plus in the fact that I think he got great value for Walman, and I like the Desharnais trade. I don't really care about the other ones other than it's always a good idea to sell for a pick if you can for the UFAs like Sturm, and you don't want to be stuck with them going, well, why didn't we trade?
I would have been fine if they kept these guys too, but but they're also replaceable too. So
yeah. And then I think the Zetterlund trade is the first real test of the pro scouting staff in terms of you had something there. You had a good player that wanted to be here that is young. He's not old. He's not 35. He's going into his prime. So I think it was it doesn't feel like a Mike Grier trade in the fact that it felt a little rushed, like 27 seconds before the deadline, and it throws it through. It's like he wanted a player and he got stuck on a value, and that's the kind of trade that can get you into trouble. And if that kind of thing continues and you make the wrong bet, you can really screw shit up if it's the wrong player.
Maybe Ottawa wouldn't give up the player at first, right?
Exactly.
So that's what it kind of sounded like if you believe Mike's
availability. But if it turns out and he's a genius and Ostapchuk is a plug and play bottom six center for the next decade, then man, you really did hit on a good trade. But time will tell. I'm not super jazzed about it. So I'm giving him a C plus overall. I also thought that maybe there could have been opportunity to try and swing some picks for guys that teams are trying to get off of their roster. Younger guys with some upside, but I think that might be the off-season moves. I think that's what he's saying. All right, it is post game or post trade deadline availability that now he's got the war chest. Let's try and use it, kind of thing.
Right. And one of the interesting things about that to close is that's exactly what Kyle Davidson said. And I think I said that last offseason too, that it felt like the Sharks and Blackhawks were competing for the same kind of players.
They are.
And I think that they might be again. guys to build around their Bedard and Celebrinis. And so I think that will be an interesting component of it. And yeah, it's hard to give a grade until we know what he's going to do with some of these assets that he's acquired. The first for Walman, the second for Zetterlund, going back to Blackwood and Granlund, the picks acquired for those guys, and CC, the picks acquired for those guys.
Yep.
So it's a little hard to say. And I think that we talk about in Mike we trust. And do I don't know, because I've never seen him build a winning team. And I've had questions about his team design in the past that I've mentioned before with specific players. So I am curious to see if he can do that. I thought he built a better team this year. The results weren't there, but I thought he did build a better, more logical team this year. I've said that. I don't deviate from that just because the results aren't there. I've talked about a lot of the stats that show that the team is better, but yeah, he still has not built a winning team. So this is going to be really the sort of the crucible, the test. Not to say his job was easy by any stretch to tear down this team. It wasn't easy, but it's easier to do that than to build a legitimate contender and to find the right players and the right room guys, combination of room / on off the ice impact guys. And so that's coming up for Mike.
In Igor Chernyshev, we trust. All right. That's my ending bit. I hope you all have a great week. We will catch you next time after probably some very tough Sharks losses and have some, bright, colorful commentary. All right. See you guys. Bye.